Hello America, this is Call of Duty Goddess. Today is July the 2nd, 2016. I'm working on a series of videos titled The Muslim Brotherhood in America and What's Behind It. In part 1, I discussed the Muslim Brotherhood, the creation of it, and many other things, and I'll leave the link below so you can watch that if you haven't watched it already. At the end of the video, I said that I was going to do part 2 on the betrayal papers as well. Well, I've decided not to, because in part 1 of this video, I briefly talked about a terror hedge against Stalin and Soviet Russia. In the betrayal papers, it briefly went over and said at the beginning of the Cold War, working with former Nazis, the American CIA began to court the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, I've looked into that, and I want to give you a detailed account of that because I believe it is what's shaping what's happening today. When you find out about the CIA and its creation, you'll see more of the bigger picture of what's happening today. So, without further ado, let's get started. We'll start with a little backdrop here, and this was given to me by Glittering Sword 1. Thank you, Glittering Sword. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded in Egypt in 1928. When Hitler rose to power, his Nazis supported al-Banna, which was the creator of the Muslim Brotherhood. And they actually helped grow the Muslim Brotherhood into its ally in the Middle East. By 1938, the membership of the Muslim Brotherhood had toppled 200,000. It's important to note that 1 year after the Muslim Brotherhood toppled 200,000 in numbers with the help of the Nazis, that they then invaded Poland. During World War II, members of the Muslim Brotherhood spied for Hitler's Nazi in the Middle East and fought for Hitler as Nazi troops in 2 specially formed Muslim Waffen SS Handschar divisions. Some say that Hassan al-Banna, who was the creator of the Muslim Brotherhood, belonged to a secret society. Now, I'm at the New English Review at an article titled How the CIA Helped the Muslim Brotherhood Infiltrate the West, and that was from August 2011. This article is based on a book by Ian Johnson, which was titled A Mosque in Munich, Nazi, CIA, and the Rise of the Muslim Brotherhood in the West. And I've pieced it together with quite a few different articles. And of course, I'll leave all the links below. As we already know, the Muslim Brotherhood was founded by a fundamentalist Egyptian schoolteacher named Hassan al-Banna in 1928. He advocated violent jihad and a replacement of secular governments with a worldwide totalitarian caliphate governed under strict Islamic Sharia law. Banna became a devotee of Adolf Hitler, who was himself an admirer of Islam and militarist jihad conquest. What is not well known is that the spread of the Muslim Brotherhood to the West was facilitated by the CIA during the Cold War era as a part of an anti-Soviet, anti-communism initiative during the Truman and Eisenhower administration. The creation of an Islamic center in Munich involved an ex-Nazi Turkologist and former Nazi Muslim veterans from the Soviet Muslim satellites, which were captured by advancing German forces during World War II in the Caucasus and Crimea. The CIA funded Hassan al-Banna's son-in-law to advance the Muslim Brotherhood cause via the World Muslim League. This resulted in a Muslim Brotherhood beachhead in the U.S. launched from the Munich Islamic Center. Gerhard von Mend, who was an ex-Nazi Turkologist and ethnic German born in Riga, Latvia, held a PhD in Soviet Studies and Economics from Berlin University and ultimately became a full professor there. Von Mend was a talented linguist, spoke Turkish and spoke several Central Asian variants: Arabic, Russian, French, English, and even Norwegian. Pre-war books by von Mend predicted the rise of independent Muslim states. If a severe shock to the Soviet Union occurred, either by invasion, akin to a failed German attack during World War II, or what occurred in the wake of the fall of the Soviet Empire and its breakup in 1991, when Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of Soviet Russia in June 1941, von Mehren was put in charge of the Hitler-era Außenministerium, which was the bureaucracy for administering the occupied territories in the East, where he developed plans for harnessing Islam, a strategy that will last long after the Nazi defeat. Von Mehren was a very willing and effective tool in Hitler's Third Reich goals. In the initial Nazi invasion of Russia, hundreds of thousands of Soviet Muslim soldiers were captured. These Muslim Soviet POWs were initially maltreated. A German officer and Uzbek expat living in Germany, Veli Kayam, entered the camps and enlisted their aid in forming fighting military units to combat their former Soviet masters. Kayam ultimately becomes head of Turkestan National Liberation Council. Another Uzbek and von Mehren protege, Basmira Hayat, became liaison to the German High Command. Several 100,000 former Soviet Muslim POWs joined this effort and formed Waffen SS units akin to those in the Balkans, like the Bosnian Dagger Division. One such Caucasian unit had regular German uniforms with a distinctive patch. These Soviet Muslim cadres in German units were used in the unsuccessful relief of Stalingrad. Other former Soviet Muslim POWs became functionaries at the Außenministerium in Berlin and were organized into national liberation desks, engaged in propaganda broadcasts, a model for post-World War II CIA-funded efforts at Radio Liberty. One of those who figures into post-World War II activities with the CIA-funded Radio Liberty is Tatar Garip Sultan, who held the Tatar Liberation Desk at the Nazi Außenministerium. Sultan was promoted to military governor of the Tatar Provisional Government by the Nazis. After working for von Mehren, he was recruited by the CIA and went to Mecca for the Hajj. He made the trip to Mecca in order to counter Soviet propaganda there. One of von Mehen's initiatives bore significant results when over 20,000 Tatars joined Waffen SS auxiliaries after the Nazis took the Crimea. Von Mehren reached out to the Grand Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini and asked him to consider taking the post of Mufti for the conquered Crimea. At the end of World War II, with the collapse of the Nazi Eastern Front, von Mehren made arrangements with British for the Muslim units to be transferred to the Western Front so as to fall into the hands of the British and the Americans, with whom they fought against in that very same war. The British and Americans seemed to be interested in this Außenministerium network because of the anti-Soviet immigrants. Some Muslim units interviewed by U.S. Army CIC evaded return to ultimate imprisonment and death in a Soviet gulag under the terms of the Yalta Agreement. Upwards of a few thousand of these ex-Nazi Muslim soldiers ended up in displaced persons camps near Munich, the largest city in the American sector of post-war Germany. Under President Truman, which was a member of the secret society called the Ancient Arabic Order of the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine, or Shriners, the CIA was created with the National Security Act of 1947. Along with the next president to take office, President Eisenhower, was the beginning of serious efforts to combat the influence and expansion of the Soviet Union around the world. They also saw use for the Muslim minorities in West Germany. Psychological warfare was a highly popular tool with the new agencies and with Eisenhower, and it would be used in future CIA intelligence work. In Europe, the CIA created the American Committee for Liberation, also known as AMCOMLIB, And Radio Liberty and Radio Free Europe were two of its propaganda operations targeting the Soviets and their satellites. Many of the Muslim minorities were employed in the daily operations of the stations, and rivalry began between those working for the Americans and those for the West Germans. Von Menn's plans for using the former Muslim soldiers to benefit West Germany were also taking shape. His Nazi past was no deterrent to him in the post-war years. Both the new West German government and the United States were willing to work with him and benefit from his various areas of expertise, just as nations did with Operation Paperclip. He was given a nice office in Dusseldorf and put in charge of the Office for Homeless Aliens. Cooperation between the two allies became more strained, however, as West German confidence increased over the years. Each feared losing the Muslim minorities to the other. Due to the growing tension in U.S.-German relations centering around West Germany's desire for reunification with East Germany, things got complicated when another former Nazi named Theodor Oberlander came into the picture. He was appointed cabinet minister in charge of refugees. As such, he pushed the particular idea that Germany should recover those vast stretches of German land lost to Poland and the Soviet Union after the war. Oberlander didn't like that the Oder-Neisse border had been fixed at war's end by the Allies. He wanted von Menn to help him get the border redrawn so as to redress the East Prussians' grievances at being made homeless by the Allied post-war remapping. He made common cause with the expellees now living in Germany in an attempt to fulfill his pipe dream and keep the issue before the public eye. The Americans were becoming alarmed at this turn of events and their belief that the West German government may seek a deal with the Soviets to get reunification with East Germany in return for remaining a neutral power. They also needed the Muslim minorities for their propaganda work and the radio stations and other projects necessitating the wooing of Muslim agents. Germans needed the Muslims for their aims as well, but didn't have quite the resources the U.S. did to sway the minorities. However, they did conceive what proved to be a very clever chess move. The Germans decided to both control and unite their Muslim assets by building them a mosque. Nuruddin Namangani was a personal friend of von Menn, who worked for the Germans. He had been a survivor of a Soviet gulag, imam of an SS division, and was a holder of high military awards. He was an ideal choice to bring Munich's Muslims in line. He was also a dedicated Islamic true believer and a Muslim unifier. A small group of Caucasus Muslims met in a beer cellar in March of 1958, chose Namangani their imam, and created the ecclesiastical administration of Muslim refugees in the German Federal Republic, which was promptly recognized by the Bonn government and put on its payroll. Bonn appropriated $30,000 in today's money to help run the office. The mosque project took off that same year in 1958, but was not completed until August 1973. Over the years, money to fund the mosque came from different sources, including the CIA, State Department, and Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, in 1956, Saeed Ramadan, son-in-law to Muslim Brotherhood founder Hassan al-Banna, also entered into the mosque story. With him came another element: the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. Ramadan had already made a name for himself in the Brotherhood, traveling all over the Arab world, lecturing and exerting his charismatic personality for the cause of Muslim unity. He also founded the Muslim World League. In 1953, Ramadan went to America with a group of Muslims for a symposium at Princeton University and took a side trip to Washington to meet with President Eisenhower. The White House and State Department wanted to work with the Muslim world and thought they could impress the symposium delegates and Ramadan about U.S. moral superiority over the Soviets. A CIA analyst reporting on the meeting had a less optimistic opinion and concluded that Ramadan seems to be a fascist, political agitator, and interested in the grouping of individuals for power. He did not display many ideas except for those of the Muslim Brotherhood. Despite initial reservations from the CIA, they chose to support Ramadan in his efforts over the years, financially, politically, and by other means. In 1956, Ramadan went to Cologne, Germany for doctoral studies under Dr. Gerhard Kegel. His thesis was how to implement Sharia Islamic law. In an interview, Dr. Kegel told Ian Johnson that Ramadan was intelligent if also fanatical. Besides working on his thesis, he was traveling all over the Muslim world promoting Islamic interests, including the mosque. The CIA was supportive and even sponsored some of his conferences. He was also successful in swaying Muslim students in Germany to his Brotherhood perspective, and succeeded in taking control of the mosque project away from von Mend and his Muslim soldiers. He had helped organize the Muslim World League but lost control of it to the Saudis, who not only funded its projects, but came into control of its governance. He was soon to lose control of the mosque as well. When it was completed in August of 1973, Ramadan didn't even attend the celebration ceremonies, as he had left the project in disgust. His son Tariq would become well known as a European model of a moderate Muslim. In 2010, Tariq was granted re-entry rights into the United States by the Obama administration, after the Bush administration had denied him visa rights for his questionable ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. He has recently spoken to admiring audiences in several venues in the U.S. When you look at the history behind World War II, the Muslim Brotherhood, the connection of Islam with the United States and European countries, one has to wonder if the CIA was possibly created for the Muslim Brotherhood. You can't help but wonder if all of these countries are vying for Islam because they know it's a very good control mechanism. Keep in mind, Islam is a religion and a political structure and law all rolled up into one. When you look at Islam, you will see the power all stems from the religious leaders, from the imams. The imams get to make up rules as they go along. It's no wonder why every country is vying for Islam, because they know that they can control the people with Islam. Now let's quickly talk about some presidents that were mentioned in here. We have President Truman, who was a Muslim Shriner, ancient Arabic order of the Nobles of the Mystic Shrine. Then we have Eisenhower. Whether Eisenhower was in a secret society or not, I do not know. In this photo, he's giving a speech at the Islamic Center in Washington. He helped build the CIA Center. He was there when the cornerstone was in place at the CIA Center. What else did Eisenhower do? He warned us about the military-industrial complex. It's important that you hear this.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. We now stand 10 years past the midpoint of a century that has witnessed 4 major wars among great nations. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Now, I don't know about you, but I've seen that video a lot of times. I enjoy watching it, but you see it in a new light after seeing the creation of the CIA and how many of the first employees and assets of the CIA were Russian Muslims and Muslim Brotherhood. Facts are facts. You can't deny it. So, there was another president that was talked about in this video, inadvertently, and that was when von Mehren wrote in one of his books about a severe shock coming to Russia, that if that happened, the Muslims would be able to make their own states. Now that happened with the bringing down of the wall, the Berlin Wall with Reagan. Let's check that out.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Is it possible that when that wall was taken down, that it allowed for many radicalized Muslims to go in to the Russian area? Is it possible that Germany was divided by the Allies to keep their power in check, so the Allies have power? A country is weakened when it's divided, correct? Is that what happened? I think it may have. It's important to note about Operation Cyclone. Operation Cyclone was the arming of the Mujahideen via the CIA. President Carter started that with the help of Zbigniew Brzezinski. After that, President Reagan was elected. Shortly after he was elected, there was an assassination attempt put on his life. President Reagan picked up Operation Cyclone and took it all full speed ahead with arming the Mujahideen via the CIA. What happened at the end of President Reagan's presidency is very telling, ladies and gentlemen. He was made an honorary Shriner. Was he made an honorary Shriner because he armed the Mujahideen? One has to ask themselves. This is not a coincidence. You cannot become a Muslim Shriner without being a 33rd degree high-level Freemason. Do you find that odd? Now let's briefly go back to the CIA and this New English Review article about this book. Now I've scrolled down, you can look for this yourself, right above where the CIA encourages support of the Muslim Brotherhood in Eisenhower's second administration. This is a very frightening aspect. That's why I wanted to point it out to you in this. Abbott Washburn, Deputy Director of the U.S. Information Agency, recalled the high priority that Eisenhower gave to religion in his personal life and in geopolitical strategy. Washburn sent a note to Eisenhower's psychological warfare whiz, C.D. Jackson, that the Princeton Islamic colloquium might achieve a hoped-for result, that the Muslims will be impressed with the moral and spiritual strength of America. These individuals can exert profound and far-reaching impact upon Muslim thinking. Their long-term influence may well outweigh that of the political leaders of their countries. As articulated in a confidential memo by Secretary of State John Forster Dulles, the hope was this psychological approach might make some important contributions to both short and long-term U.S. political objectives in the Muslim area. The objectives were to guide and promote the Islamic Renaissance. A renaissance is the bringing forth, the resurrection. That's the caliphate. Dulles said he wants to promote the Islamic caliphate, the resurrection of the caliphate. Now, I've got to tell you, this goes back to the Sykes-Picot and World War I. If you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. And that's very important. World War I and World War II and Islam are crucial in understanding what is happening today. I cannot stress that enough. However, the Muslim Brotherhood had a political rather than a cultural objective. That is what the Muslim Brotherhood does. They are a political arm of jihad. They were created by a secret society. That guy who created the Muslim Brotherhood was in a secret society. I'll continue. That led the U.S. to reach out to U.S. Saudi oil conglomerate Aramco to underwrite the travel grants for this Princeton program. In July 1953, the U.S. Embassy in Cairo invited Ramadan to the 10-day Princeton programs. Ramadan and other participants traveled to Washington for a photo op with President Eisenhower, and you saw all that. The CIA subsequently did an analysis of Ramadan, and we already talked about that. But they knew what he was. They knew full well. Maybe some of the people involved could have been coaxed into doing things if they didn't know about Islam. But believe me, the people at the top knew about Islam. So let's look at more recent developments between the CIA and Islam. I'm at Judicial Watch at the Corruption Chronicles at an article titled, "Did CIA Meet with CAIR to Purge Anti-Muslim Training Material?" It's classified. That's dated October 10th, 2014. Well, it seems that after Judicial Watch sued the FBI for FOIA requests about purging their training materials, they also sued the CIA. In fact, Judicial Watch's first public records request cites a documented incident involving a lecturer at the CIA campus in Elkridge, Maryland, who came under CAIR's fire for alleged Islamophobia. Previous to that, another defense instructor got fired for similar complaints. Less than a year later, Judicial Watch filed a second request, specifically asking for records of communications and meetings with CAIR, since the group was the driving force behind the FBI purge. This week, the CIA sent Judicial Watch an amusing response, claiming that it can neither confirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of records involving meetings or communications with CAIR. Here's why. According to the spy agency, it's classified intelligence information that's protected from disclosure. So our best bet is just to examine the director of the CIA and see what we get out of that. So we're going to start here with a video of an ex-FBI agent talking about the director of the CIA, John Brennan.
Well, as it relates to John Brennan, there are a couple things that I think are important to say off the bat. And the first is, my contention is he's wholly unfit for government service in any national security capacity. And that would specifically make him unfit to be the director of Central Intelligence for the United States. And I would break it down into three key areas that make him unfit for duty. The first is he has interwoven his life professionally and personally with individuals that we know are terrorists, and he has given them access to not only senior leaders inside the government, but has given them access to the National Security Council, the National Security Staff. He has brought known Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood operatives into those positions of government. He has overseen and approved and encouraged others to bring known leaders of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood into the government in positions to advise the U.S. government on counterterrorism strategy as well as the overall quote-unquote war on terror. That's just the first part. The second part, I would say, is he has proven through his own comments publicly that he is clueless and grossly ignorant of Al-Qaeda's strategy. Now, Mr. Brennan himself says that Al-Qaeda is the enemy, which those folks who have read or aware of my work and Tom, the work we did with Team B2 report, know that that's not the total threat. But the first thing is Mr. Brennan believes the threat is just Al-Qaeda, which is problematic. And number two, even when he discusses Al-Qaeda, he does not know what he's talking about. So he's ignorant of that enemy, their strategy, and how they operate. And then third and finally, which some would say is most disturbing, is Mr. Brennan did convert to Islam when he served in an official capacity on behalf of the United States in Saudi Arabia. And that fact alone is not what is most disturbing and makes him unfit for duty. What makes him unfit for duty was his conversion to Islam was the culmination of a counterintelligence operation against him to recruit him. And the fact that foreign intelligence service operatives recruited Mr. Brennan when he was in a very sensitive and senior U.S. government position in a foreign country means that he is either a traitor, which I'm not saying, but that's one of the options, and he did this all willingly and knowingly, or he did it unwillingly and unwittingly, which means he is naive and does not understand. He has the inability to discern and understand how to walk in those kind of environments, right, which makes him completely unfit to be the Director of Central Intelligence.
After hearing that, I think it's only fair to hear from John Brennan himself talk about his life experiences.
But for more than 3 decades, I have also had the tremendous fortune to travel the world, and as part of that experience, to learn about the goodness and beauty of Islam. As a college student in the 1970s, I spent a summer traveling through Indonesia, taking in the wonderful landscape, culture, and people of Java and Bali. Despite my long hair, my earring, and my obvious American appearance, I was welcomed throughout that country in a way that is a reflection of the tremendous warmth of Islamic cultures and societies. Like the president during his childhood years in Jakarta, I came to see Islam, not how it is often misrepresented, but for what it is, how it is practiced every day by well over 1 billion Muslims worldwide, a faith of peace and tolerance and great diversity. And if you permit me, or I should say, اسمح بعد إندونيسيا سافرت إلى مصر وهناك درست عربية في جامعة أمريكية في القاهرة، وهذا في سنة 1975 و 76. وسافرت إلى الأردن وفلسطين والقدس وتونس، وبعد مصر ساكن في الشرق الأوسط تقريبا 6 سنة، لكن الآن أنا أجوز. أنا كنت طالب وشباب لما درست عربية، لكن الآن نسيت أكثرية اللغة. كسلان، لسان كسلان. متأسف، لكن ممكن إن شاء الله سوف Adros Arabiya Maritani, inshallah. Afwan. Now, don't tell the folks who don't speak Arabic what I said, okay? But I did spend time as an undergraduate at the American University in Cairo in the 1970s, and time spent with classmates from Egypt, from Jordan, from Palestine, and around the world, who taught me that whatever our differences of nationality or race or religion or language, there are certain aspirations that we all share: to get an education, to provide for our families, to practice our faith freely, to live in peace and security. And during a 25-year career in government, I was privileged to serve in positions across the Middle East, as a political officer with the State Department and as a CIA station chief in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, I saw how our Saudi partners fulfilled their duty as custodian of the two holy mosques of Mecca and Medina. I marveled at the majesty of the Hajj and the devotion of those who fulfill their duty as Muslims by making that pilgrimage. And in all my travels, the city I have come to love most is Al-Quds, Jerusalem, where three great faiths come together. So much attention is paid to the divisions in that wonderful city.
It's important for you to make your own decision about the contents of this video. I'll try to leave all the links where I got all the information below. But my main concern, my main goal, my main issue is that I believe that every American needs to read the Quran, needs to understand Sharia law and what Islam is. It is a threat to the Western world because it's not really a religion. It's a totalitarian system of control. And the harnessing of Islam did not begin with World War II. It started way before then. And it'll take time, but I'll try to do more videos with the history of the experiment of how the Western world and how countries are trying to harness Islam to use it for their own gain, at the expense of human lives. Muslim lives as well. They are people too. They're brainwashed, just like all of us. And this is not right. But when you look at the Islamic religion and how they're trained and how they're subverted and how the indoctrination process works, it's extremely frightening. And one has to wonder if they can actually even trust a person that's Islamic. That sounds so horrible, I know, but it's the truth. It's the truth. I don't want to see another person die to martyr themselves for Allah or to kill in the name of Allah. The killing in the name of Allah has got to stop. This is Call of Duty Goddess signing off, and as always, I've got your 6.